Welcome to Pioneers in Payments, where payments experts share their insights. Now, here's our host, Donna Blum.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Pioneers in Payments. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Scott Anchin from ICBA. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And for those that don't know, ICBA is the Independent Community Bankers of America, right?
That's right. And we represent the many community banks across the country. And just for viewers who aren't aware, just a couple interesting facts. Community banks employ nearly 700,000 Americans and are actually the only physical banking presence in one of 3 U.S. counties. So certainly a very valuable and important economic engine in this country.
Right. There's a lot of people who would not have access to banks if it weren't for those community banks. So, very good. Well, Scott, to get us started, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background in the payments industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually a lawyer by training, and I started my career working on fiscal policy within the White House. But I joined the Fed about 10 years ago, working on payments regulation, so getting really in the weeds with things like Reg CC and Reg II and some of the lesser known payments regs that the Fed works on. But I quickly became sort of one of the initial members of the Fed's payments improvement team. So I worked with the Fed's payment improvement initiatives for really that full 10 years, all the way from about the inception of the program all the way up through the announcement of FedNow. And so that includes things like the Fed's Faster Payments Task Force that I imagine a lot of viewers are familiar with or even participated in, and also the formation of the U.S. Faster Payments Council, which is up and running and recently celebrated its 5-year anniversary. So have been sort of along for the ride as instant payments has been thought about and has taken off over the last 10 years. So it's very gratifying and rewarding to now see, after all the talk, to see implementation happening.
Right. Well, and to see now finally FedNow is released and um, the adoption is picking up. So that's kind of the fruit of your labors, right?
Exactly. And many others across the industry.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for all your contributions there. It is a very exciting time in the industry. I rejoined BHMI about 2 years ago, so it would be nice if I could kind of go back in time and see just sort of that progression over the last 10 years. Yeah, there's a lot has happened over the last decade.
And I think that all that work was really impactful because I really think it created a new kind of openness and willingness to collaborate across the industry and to sit down and talk about issues that previously had been very divisive and maybe difficult to sort of get through. But now I think we see a lot more collaboration, and collegiality within the industry. So in addition to the substantive things that happened, I think that we have just a great tone within the payments industry now.
I would agree with that. Well, let's get into the meat of it. So, you have so much knowledge about what's going on in the industry, and everybody that I talk with kind of has a different perspective, right? So, I want to get your perspective today on, for starters, what would you say is the most notable trend in the payments industry today?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll point to two things. One of them I think is good news. The other one maybe less good news. And I think the first one, let me start with the good news. The good news is instant payments adoption. I think, I'm going to speak a little bit from the perspective of the community banking industry, which I know quite well. And I will say that when the Fed first announced its payments improvement initiative, community bankers were immediately understanding and interested in the benefits that a faster, more secure, more efficient payment system could bring to their business. And so throughout my time at ICBA and prior to my time at ICBA when I was at the Fed, I had the opportunity to talk to many community banks about sort of how they're feeling and what they're seeing. And I think right now, they're looking very carefully at some of the new use cases that instant payments enables for them. And this is sort of across both FedNow and RTP, just instant payments broadly. And I think that that's great news. One of the other things that community banks are doing as a result of these new networks coming to market is sitting down with their customers and having really intentional discussions about how these instant payments networks can help them create efficiencies, create opportunities for their customers. This has always been a strength of community banks, knowing their customers, knowing what they need and how they can benefit. But it's giving them another opportunity to sit down and continue to build those relationships. So I think that's really, really positive, and that's something that we're seeing more and more. One of the things I'd love to see, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about this as we go on in this conversation, but I'd love to see some true technical interoperability across FedNow and RTP. I think that there's solutions to get around that. There's routing solutions and technology solutions, but I think that really community banks and probably financial institutions more broadly would really benefit from that. But on the whole, I think that instant payments adoption has been just a real beneficial trend for the industry. I think on the flip side, one of the things we're seeing is an increase in concern about fraud. Now, fraud, of course, has always been an operational concern in financial services. I think it always will be, unfortunately. Fraudsters are growing increasingly more sophisticated, and as one door closes, another door opens for them. But one of the most surprising things I think that I'm seeing is an increase in check fraud. And so check fraud is really hitting our community banks very hard, and I think financial institutions more broadly as well. And the good news is, of course, that there's a lot of mechanisms, I think, to sort of start to combat this. I think the Fed's work on their fraud classifier model was great because it gives us a common language to talk about these things. There's a lot of new technology solutions to help detect and mitigate check fraud. The U.S. Postal Service is doing good work to try and stop check fraud at its source, so securing mailboxes and things like that. But I think certainly this rise in fraud, and especially check fraud, is sort of a concerning trend. Now, if we want to tie these two trends together, adoption in instant payments and the rise in fraud, especially check fraud, I think that instant payments actually offers a solution for reducing check fraud, especially because instant payments are, of course, much more secure, and people aren't stealing things out of mailboxes and altering physical things. So I think that as instant payments adoption picks up and increases, I think we'll start to see a reduction in check fraud. So as bankers sit down and they talk to their customers about how instant payments can benefit them, I think that a real talking point is reducing check fraud, moving away from paper checks, taking advantage of electronic payments is a real benefit. And I think actually I'll add a third one, if that's okay. A third thing that's sort of taken me by surprise as well is an increasing awareness amongst consumers about the way that payments move. I think for a long time, people were sort of less aware of the mechanisms that move payments, but we're now seeing consumers actually talk about things like FedNow by name, right? We don't hear consumers talking about chips or FedWire or FedACH or EPN, but we hear consumers talking about FedNow. There's a little bit of concern about misapprehensions about what exactly that is. There's some people thinking maybe it's a central bank digital currency, or there's some conspiracy theories around what the Fed might be doing with FedNow. But I think if you want to create a silver lining, you want to look on the bright side. Again, it gives banks an opportunity to sit down with their customers and really educate them about what this is and how it can help them. So I think that consumers using the word FedNow is really interesting and really provides a benefit that banks can capitalize on. So some really interesting things driven, again, by instant payments and fraud.
That's really interesting, as you were talking about how as instant payments increases, we'll see a decrease in check fraud. That makes so much sense. I think that there's perhaps a generation that just thinks that checks are more secure, right? I'm thinking of my mother, for example. She doesn't want to use her credit card very often because she doesn't want all these different players having access to her credit card information. So she uses checks primarily. But yeah, so it's just kind of retraining them. There's a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and I know that if you look at some of the payment studies that are out there, like the Fed's payment study, we see that although check volume is decreasing, check value is actually increasing. So fewer checks are being written, but they're larger checks. And I think that speaks to the fact that there is a generation or a segment of business or something that still relies on checks. And I think that instant payments offers a real opportunity to combat check fraud, move people away from this insecure method. Because it's funny, thinking about your mother, and I think, my parents think similarly about credit cards. But when you think about a check, you have your account number and your name and your address printed right on there, which is certainly very insecure. So just an interesting shift, I think, that we're seeing in the industry. Hopefully it becomes a shift.
Hopefully, yes. Well, that education is going to be so critical. Well, moving on to the next question, Scott. We're seeing lots of trends, but as far as let's say the community banks or even larger organizations that are processing payments, what would you say is the greatest opportunity for them today?
Yeah, without a doubt, I think the opportunity to begin exploring some of the new use cases that instant payments enables is just a huge opportunity. And I think about consumers around the country, and certainly the consumers that community banks serve. A lot of consumers are living paycheck to paycheck, so you have use cases enabled by instant payments like earned wage access that can provide a real concrete benefit to consumers. So if businesses are able to send funds to their employees as they earn them, that can really help to alleviate some of the costs associated with living paycheck to paycheck. And I think the same thing is true with in the ability to instantly fund loans. So when I think about some of the small business needs for capital around the country, in the markets that these community banks serve, I can imagine that being able to provide working capital immediately could be a huge benefit to these customers. And I also think about some of our community banks that serve as primarily rural agricultural communities. Some of these farms rely again on working capital to pay their workers and to fund the supplies, and the ability for loans to be funded instantly through instant payments is just a huge potential benefit. And I want to think too about something that I've said before, that as they think about these new use cases, it gives community banks another opportunity to sit down with their customers. And this, like I said, has always been a strength of community banks, knowing their customers, knowing the markets, knowing the people they serve, knowing the way they work. It gives them just another opportunity to sit down and build on those relationships and say, how can instant payments benefit you? What are the products and services that we can offer you now that this network is live and on the market that we couldn't do before? So I think that that's absolutely a huge opportunity for community banks and truly all financial institutions.
Right. I would agree. I mean, I think that being customer centric is really so critical, right? But these community banks maybe have an advantage over some of those larger organizations where they can sit at the same table and have a conversation and really dive into their customers' needs.
Yeah, they have opportunities to be proactive too, and to say, to some of their business customers, we see the volumes and the types of transactions that you're processing, and we think you could really benefit from these various services. So it becomes very tailored and very individualized, which to me is just a huge advantage and very exciting.
Yes, I would agree with that. Okay, so we talked about the greatest opportunity. What would you say is the greatest challenge for these community banks and other organizations that process payments?
Yeah, and I would say it's complexity. And so, in my mind, that comes in two forms. One, you have the decision complexity that's associated with all of the different payments mechanisms that are out there now, all of the different ways to connect. And I think that certainly there's a ton of thinking that has to go into that, and it can't be just a spur of the moment decision to go with one of these services. And then on top of that, there's a lot of overlay services that ride these rails. So when we're talking about some of these instant payments use cases, uh, FedNow or RTP provide the underlying rail, of course, to transfer the funds, but they're not the overlay that really enable a use case, right? So if an employer is going to enable instant wage payments, there needs to be an interface for that, and there needs to be a mechanism for small businesses to enter the funds that they can pay out to their employees. And so there's just so many options, I think, for community banks and for all financial institutions to sort through, that it just becomes very, very challenging. And then I think there's a second layer to that, and that's then the implementation complexity, right? So as you add new payment mechanisms, new rails, new overlay services, you have to harmonize technology solutions, policies, procedures. There's tons of compliance requirements. And all of this takes a lot of personnel time and funding. And there's no way that that can't be a challenge. And I think that exacerbating this, there's a lot of apps out there that consumers are familiar with. They come and they go, and there's confusion about what's a financial institution service, what's a fintech service, non-bank service. So just a lot of complexity. And I'll double down, I guess, on what I said. If we want to look for a silver lining to this, it's an opportunity for community banks and financial institutions of all sizes, to the extent that they have the capacity, to sit down with their customers and help them to understand what all this means, to really provide some of that foundational education. But absolutely, I think complexity is a huge challenge that community banks are facing right now.
All right, Scott. So that is just really great information about the challenges that are being faced today by organizations that process payments. You are so correct. There is a lot of complexity. And I guess that's one of the reasons why we created this podcast, is to sort of try to boil it down for these payments professionals and help them to really make some decisions based on best practices, so they're not feeling like a deer caught in the headlights, right? So, well, I do have one other question for you, and that is about, and this is my favorite question, by the way. Um, if you were to take your sum total of knowledge and offer one silver bullet piece of advice, what would that be?
So it relates very much to the complexity situation that we talked about. And my one piece of advice, and this is not rocket science, but I think it certainly bears emphasis, is that financial institutions need to plan their work and work their plan. You always need to have a plan. I spoke with a group of community bank CIOs earlier this week, and we talked about the different types of technology risk that exist when implementing instant payments. And I really emphasize the fact that because all this risk exists, you need a strategic plan. You need to be deliberative and deliberate in thinking through all these risks before you move forward. Now, there's a lot of cores and third-party service providers that are encouraging banks to sign up with them to implement instant payments. And that's a great thing, because I think that's very important. But I think that before community banks or financial institutions of any size make that move, they need to think through their plan for how they're going to add this to their services, deal with the complexities, deal with the compliance requirements, and really move forward in a way that it's going to benefit both themselves as a business, but also their clients. So I think that folks need to do their research. They need to understand their opportunities and really create a very careful strategic plan for moving forward. This is not something to just jump into blindly. I think that if financial institutions can do that, they'll be so well equipped to offer something of great value to their customers.
Yeah, that's so true. I think I've said it before, but if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So, so important. Okay, so before I let you go, Scott, I would really like to share with our audience information about how they can learn more about ICBA, the services that you provide, and then also maybe how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love to speak to anybody about instant payments or operational risk issues like fraud, especially small and community banks. So I encourage anyone to reach out to me via email. My email address is just scott.anchin@icba.org. And I'm more than happy to set up a call, have a conversation, talk through whatever's on your mind.
Wonderful. And I would imagine ICBA has a website as well where they might be able to get some more information.
Yep, that's exactly right. ICBA.org. We have a lot of information on our website. We offer a lot of different services to our members and to community banks broadly.
Scott, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. I just appreciate all that you've shared with me and with our audience. And I also just want to thank everybody for watching today. Have a great day.